Great. Well, hello, everyone who might be listening on the webinar. We are here to listen to the presentation of the University of Illinois Champaign Urbana team. They have been given their instructions. One other instruction needs to come from our technical consultant, Ravi Rajan. Perhaps you could give that instruction now, Mr. Rajan.
Yeah, so I'm going to be spotlighting the presenters when they're up. So right before you start talking, just say your name so I'll know who to spotlight. And if you have any problems or anything, let me know. Thanks.
Just their first name is enough?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so before you speak, just so Ravi can find you in the mix, just give your first name. Great. Okay, well, I will be the timekeeper, and I don't know who the first up person is going to be. Can you tell me who that is?
Yep, that'll be me. My name is Nabil. So we'll have Joshua be the slide share here. So we'll get that.
Well, tell me when you're ready, and I'll press the start button.
Really, I have a quick question.
Oh, sure.
As faculty advisor, do you want me to turn my camera off, or do you have a preference as far as that goes?
Ravi, what's your practice?
Yeah, you can keep it off. We just want the essential people that are.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Okay. So
it seems like Joshua's unable to share his screen right now. I think he might need to have permissions enabled.
I see. Oh, he's not able to share screen.
Yeah, I got it. I forgot to set sharing all panelists. Okay, give it another try now.
Does it work now? Okay.
Yeah, that looks good. There we go.
Okay. So, are you ready to start, Nabil?
I think we're all ready to start.
Okay, begin.
All right, hello everyone. So our topic is on data privacy, specifically transparency in terms and conditions. My name is Nabil Mustafa. I'm a junior majoring in information systems and marketing.
My name is Rashni Raja. I'm a senior studying information systems and management.
My name is PJB. I'm a junior studying entrepreneurship and information systems.
My name is Joshua Goss. I'm a senior studying marketing.
All right, now let's move on to our issue. So your user agreement sucks. Anyone remember this quote from John Kennedy during the Facebook testimony? Well, trending all over Facebook in 2018, not just Facebook actually, every single social media platform on the planet, the hashtag delete Facebook was trending by millions and millions of clicks. User data pulled from Facebook had been manipulated without user consent. How was Facebook even able to get access to this data? Well, through an overly complex user agreement. Facebook was able to manipulate users into forfeiting their privacy rights. How do you feel about accepting an agreement that you were unable to understand? Well, that's kind of what our entire presentation is all about. Now I'll pass it off to Rashni to further dive into the issue at hand.
Hello, my name is Rashni. So we're just going to introduce and analyze the problem. So our problem at hand is that social media users don't often understand the terms and conditions that they agree to when they're signing up for these social media platforms. And Instagram is a prime example of this. So our recommendation as Instagram consultants is to be transparent in their terms and conditions agreement, because the average American should be able to understand the terms that they agree to. So when looking at our industry, the social media industry overview, we can see that social media usage is very prevalent in today's society and will only continue to grow. The industry has an annual growth rate of about 12%. And on average, users spend 144 minutes per day on social media. In addition to that, 75% of the world's population and 79% of Americans use social media. And of those, only 52% of Americans believe that their data is actually being protected. So Instagram's mission statement has always been to capture and share the world's moments. And they've done this with much success thus far. Starting from October 6, 2010, when Instagram was created, to December 12th of that same year, they reached 1 million users. Then on February 2013, they had 100 million monthly users. By September 2015, Instagram began launching their advertisements globally. And then by June 20th, 2018, they had 1 billion users. And by December of last year, they had 2 billion users. 2 billion users, all who are capturing and sharing the world's moments. And this number is only going to continue to grow, which is why it is important that we understand digital privacy and all that encompasses. So currently, there's a mix of laws that are protecting consumer privacy, such as HIPAA or FERPA, but there's a lack of regulation that is taken into account with respect to companies that digitally harvest data. When looking at the current relevant laws in the United States specifically that cover digital privacy and harvesting data, we can see that there's only 4 policies that are signed into law. That is the California Consumer Privacy Act, the Colorado Privacy Act, the Virginia Consumer Data Protection Act, and the Utah Consumer Privacy Act. This means that only 8% of our country has regulations in place that protect the privacy of consumers. 30% or 15 states have bills that are in committee, and they've been in committee for a while. And 62% or 31 states don't have a bill of this nature even introduced. Bottom line is that the United States does not have a federal law that protects privacy among all states in regards to harvesting data. However, there is a leading example of data privacy and security law, and that's called the General Data Protection Regulation. The GDPR was drafted and passed in the European Union, and it basically obligates companies to abide by privacy and security standards in relation to targeting and collecting consumers' data digitally. This law is aimed to protect consumers from unlawful data collection, and it will impose fines on any sort of violations. These violations can result in fines that range up to 4% of the company's global revenue, and of those affected from the violation, they can also seek compensation if they wish to do so. Now I'll be passing it over to Nabil to discuss a relevant case in digital privacy between Facebook and Cambridge Analytica.
Thank you, Rashmi. So now we're going to get back to Facebook really quick. Anyone remember these awkward pictures of Mark Zuckerberg while testifying in front of Congress? Well, Mark was testifying because Cambridge Analytica, a British political consulting firm, harvested data from Facebook without user consent to create psychographic user profiles to be utilized for political advertising in the Donald Trump campaign. Facebook's terms and conditions are incredibly complicated, wordy, and to be quite put in simple terms, they are just straight out difficult to understand. But surely everyone's thinking at least an attorney or a lawyer would be able to understand, right? Well, unfortunately, the answer to that isn't as clear cut. At the Facebook testimony, after having read Facebook's privacy policy, Senator Lindsey Graham stated, "I'm a lawyer and I have no idea what that means." So what's the main point we're getting at here? At least if people are unable to understand the contract, at least they're unable to understand the business, correct? Well, based on that testimony, and testifying from other attorneys, we were able to understand that not everyone is able to understand complex legal documents. But what about the complexities of online business? So here's a question asked by Senator Hatch. How do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service? Well, this question is essentially a basic principle of online business. If Senator Hatch was at least a little informed about online business, Senator Hatch would have known that most online social media companies run an ad-based business model. Now, what does this mean? To be put simply, not everyone understands online business, especially those in the latter age bracket. But young people aren't exempt either. About 97% of young people consent to legal terms and services without reading them. So if students are being unable to read them and unable to understand, there's some clear trend here, which is demonstrated by this fact. Technological proficiency and contractual capacity varies across a wide range. And we feel like by simplifying user agreements, the average to the point where the average American can understand the rights they are forfeiting, companies are doing a great social justice, not just to consumers, but to the world in general. We feel like it is extremely unethical for social media companies to gain the right to manipulate your personal data through what we feel like is contract manipulation. Everyone should be able to understand the agreements they accept. So that's why we want to simplify these agreements and give people autonomy to get their data rights back. So as demonstrated by Cambridge Analytica, we feel like Cambridge Analytica sets the stage for other social media platforms to follow. The concept is new and largely untouched in the legal sector, and we feel like companies need to learn from Facebook's mistakes and set the precedent for ethical practice now. Now I'll hand it off to PJ to discuss the solution more.
Thanks, Nabil. So for our proposed solution, we encourage Instagram to completely update their terms and conditions. As of now, Instagram's terms and conditions are very generic, containing lots of words that an average American would never be able to understand. We suggest that Instagram should create a modifiable terms and conditions that's entirely transparent and gives users greater authority of what data rights they wish to forfeit. Taking a look at terms and conditions across the entire industry, it's very clear that the entire industry needs work. There's currently no standard, so people really have no idea what to expect when deciding whether or not they're going to read over the terms and conditions. Let's take a look at two different sides of this spectrum, Microsoft and Google. Now, on one side, Microsoft's terms and conditions are way too overly complicated and contain far too many words. With over 15,000 words, Microsoft's terms and conditions would take over an hour to read. That's longer than Art of War by Sun Tzu. On the other side, Google's terms and conditions are short, yet purposefully vague. 3,500 words are nowhere near enough words to fully encompass all the data that Google collects as a search engine, with almost 17 minutes to read. So looking at some specific examples from Microsoft and Google, Microsoft has countless terms in their terms and conditions that could potentially harm people, yet are hidden through walls of text. By clicking through their end user license agreement for Windows XP, you're agreeing to let Microsoft download software onto your computer, which has been a problem before because people have no idea where the software got onto their computer from. In a 2003 lawsuit against Microsoft, a woman sued them because she couldn't read this end user agreement before buying the product, and afterwards, when she fully read it and did not agree with it, wasn't able to return it. If she was more informed about this, she would not have made that decision. On Google's side, in 2015, Google was forced to rewrite their privacy rules after being ordered by the UK Commissioner's Office to make it less confusing. This search giant was way too vague about their information, and thus people really had no idea what they were trying to communicate. For Instagram, we encourage you to set the standard for what terms and conditions should look like. So what should this standard look like? We've built a framework for ethical terms and conditions that we believe Instagram should use in order to set this standard. So let's take a look at it, beginning with an abstract. A large majority of people won't read terms and conditions at all because of a mental block where they don't want to read it because they assume it would take so long. But if there was an abstract at the top of the page, it would encourage people just to take a look at this very short summary. And if there were anything in the summary that they would catch, they'd be encouraged to actually read through and follow up on that. The next aspect of our framework is specificity. If you include exact numbers about how much data is collected, where it's being collected, and how it's being used, people are a lot more likely to trust you and see, given that they know exactly what they're doing with their data. This will increase Instagram's market size because people will be more comfortable. Next, we suggest a TLDR. If you aren't familiar with what a TLDR is, it means too long, didn't read. And it's a common term on the internet when there's a really long post on a forum with a TLDR at the bottom with just a 2 to 3 sentence summary of that entire post. Our suggestion is after every specific section on Instagram's terms and conditions, you include a TLDR. This would allow people to skim through the terms and conditions, see a brief summary, and then for the specific issues that they want to know more about, they would be able to elaborate on them by reading the actual fine print. Next, we want to include choices in terms and conditions. As it is now in the industry, it's a binary of whether you were to accept the terms and conditions or not to accept. So most people agree blindly because they want access to the product. So they literally have no choice but to accept the terms and conditions. Allowing choices would encourage people to read through as well, because then they'll have a say in what they want. And we suggest that these choices be saying a level of privacy instead of a yes or no question. Next, the length is very important of your entire terms and conditions. If someone were to read the entire thing, it should be no more than 20 minutes to read. Anything more than that is redundant. If Google can fit theirs into 3,500 words, then you can elaborate a little more on the things that Google would be a little vague about and keep it still under 5,000 words. Next, the level. The reading level is really important because how most terms and conditions are written today, it's way beyond a level that the average American would be able to understand. We recommend a 10th grade reading level because that's what the New York Times uses for all of their newspaper posts. However, this level should also take into account minority groups with phrasing in different languages. So we suggest not only a 10th grade reading level, but changing the level to include different cultures and languages. So now I'm going to pass to Nabil to outline an app that does this particularly well.
Thank you, PJ. So some apps today already have implemented a very similar framework to the one that we just described. You can see in the image in the right, there's a particular feature that we would like the judges to pay attention to, as there is a toggle feature. And if we can move on to the next slide, we can go further in depth into this toggle feature. So this toggle feature essentially allows for users to switch their level of privacy to the app. So as you can see in process 1 through process 3 to process 5, the app progressively accepts less data or more data, depending on the user's preference. So as you toggle your preference, the user can essentially choose what data they would like to be accepted or rejected by the app. And essentially the user has complete autonomy over the data that they collect. This is what we feel like is an ethical example of what consumer control over their data is. So just to briefly go over, this demonstrated app allows for users this demonstrated app gives users a monthly reminder of the terms and conditions they agree to. So users are essentially reminded of what terms they agree to and any sort of policy updates that occurred. So complete transparency over a long-term period of time. Users can toggle the amount of data the app has access to, and users can constantly change the level of privacy at any time. There's no such thing as a binding contract in this app. The app interface is also simple to navigate, and the app clearly describes how it will use the user's data. The privacy toggle is also easy to use, and there's no in-depth understanding of data collection required to understand this. Now, I'll pass it off to Josh to discuss the ethical implications of our project.
We looked at different perspectives, including ethically, financially, and legally, as we answered the question why Instagram should accept our solution. Ethically, we looked at multiple ethical frameworks that will help one determine how to make an ethical decision. The two that were the most compelling was a framework called deontology and a framework called virtual ethics. Now, deontology tells us to treat others with respect and dignity and not as mere tools. It also poses a statement, only do what you can rationally recommend everyone in similar situations do. Now we have two options. If we were to go option 1, which is to go with our recommendation, doing so, Instagram would use our framework to help amend its terms and conditions. The terms and conditions will be simplified so that the average person would know what he or she is signing, and it will also help prevent users from forfeiting rights by reading tons of unfamiliar and tricky words. And let's just say Instagram was to go option 2. Option 2, in a sense, would be to do nothing. Instagram will reject our help when it comes to amending their terms and conditions, and Instagram will continue to manipulate people into signing away rights. They will continue to manipulate people by getting tons of revenue from all the data that they are collecting from people unknowingly signing away. In a sense, this is unethical. It is unethical to use tricky and confusing terms to get consent of individuals. Let's just say everyone was to do this, and we're trying to make this a universal rule. It will get to a point where no one even trusts to sign terms and conditions. So in a sense, it would be very irrational to recommend this as a universal rule and in this situation. Therefore, it makes more sense to choose option 1 as the most ethical choice. Another familiar term that we used was the virtual ethics. And in a sense, we pose the questions, what would a virtuous company do in this situation? What would a virtuous person do? And either option 1, which is to use our recommendation, or option 2, which is to do nothing, implicates either vices to avoid or virtues to practice. And one of our most extensive stakeholders are the users / customers. And a well-virtuous company would be fair with their users and customers. They will be very considerate of the language used when asking individuals to sign up for something, and they wouldn't take advantage of customers or try to manipulate users in any way. Right now, Instagram is currently collecting data from users, treating them merely as a tool. This is unethical, showing greed, deceptions, and to be ethical, you have to treat people with dignity. In order to act ethically, I believe companies need to have a policy that treat people as human with dignity and respect, and our framework is designed to do exactly that. Now I'm going to pass it over to Rashni, who will speak from a financial point of view regarding our implementation.
Thank you. So the second reason we believe our solution is viable is through a financial perspective. Many companies have faced financially detrimental consequences due to their lack of privacy in regards to transparency in regards to their privacy policy. In 2011, the FTC investigated Twitter on a complaint of misleading consumers on their data collection. In essence, Twitter was misusing consumers' personal data to serve ads, and thus these third-party companies had gained access to both public and non-public information. Over time, the FTC and the Twitter reached a settlement that resulted in a $250 million fine. So Twitter's financial policy was misleading to consumers, and in turn, they faced a major lawsuit. And we believe that in implementing our framework, Instagram can avoid a potential lawsuit like this and avoid the financial strains it took on the company. And that all starts with transparency. There are some financial costs associated with such a lawsuit. To begin, the company will be faced with the cost of all the legal fees. This includes attorney fees, filing fees, and service fees. And lawsuits like this are very time consuming, so those fees could range up for a while. This also affects the brand image. Having a lawsuit like this can bring about a lot of negative press, and that negative press can lead to a decline in stock prices. And over time, that will take a long time to recover from. And we acknowledge that there is a trade-off present, right? With an increased attention towards transparency and privacy, Instagram will have a decrease in the collection of their data, and thus a potential decline in their profits from ad revenue. However, we believe that what Instagram will gain will be worth it. They will get an increased consumer trust and positive media attention, and this positive press will then attract more users to Instagram, expanding their scope of their company. All by creating a transparent business, Instagram will become the ethical leaders in the industry. That was just the justification of our solution through a financial perspective. Now I will pass it over to Nabil, who will discuss this through a legal perspective.
Thank you, Rashni. So a large part of our thinking behind our solution comes with the anticipation of legal change. As mentioned earlier, the legal environment revolving around data privacy is very, very new, and we feel like technology has simply outpaced Congress. There are certain bills that are currently in committee, such as the Banning Surveillance Act of 2022, which bans personal data usage for any sort of targeted advertising. There's also the Data Protection Act of 2021, which is currently still in committee, which establishes the Federal Data Privacy Regulator, which is essentially a government agency that regulates any sort of highly sensitive and high-risk data privacy transactions. With a situation like Cambridge Analytica, with such a bureau in place, that could have entirely been avoided. Now we'll take some time to pass it off to PJ and discuss the implementation.
Thanks, Nabil. So let's take a look at the way we suggest Instagram implement this solution. We have 3 steps, all relatively simple, to take to fast track your way towards ethical contract legislation. First of all, we insist on a complete rewrite of Instagram's terms and conditions. Using our framework, you should completely change how your terms and conditions look in a neat and an understandable way. Next, once this terms and conditions is completely rewritten and ready to be launched, design a marketing campaign based on your newfound transparency. It will be impossible to lose customers as a result of this because people want to see that the companies that they use are transparent. You only stand to gain consumers' trust and market share by doing this. More people will want to support you, and you might even gain new potential customers. Lastly, we suggest that you play an active role in terms contract legislation. If you become an advocate for ethical consumption and transparency, Instagram will be more likely to be internationally recognized as the standard for ethical terms and conditions. So some of the ways we suggest that you play a role in this legislation is by supporting companies who do general data protection regulation. For example, one company, Loyal, that's Loyall, 2 L's, supports this compliance. And so by supporting this company and partnering with them, you will help encourage other companies in the industry to embrace these new frameworks. We also suggest that once this terms and conditions is launched, begin a petition on your platform for Congress to start considering new terms of service regulation and legislation. As far as this petition goes, it will show Instagram as at the forefront of this, and maybe Congress will take notice and start to debate on these issues. So let's take a look at a timeline of some of these steps. So we suggest you begin audit of your terms and conditions next month. Hit the ground running, don't waste any time for this. With a new terms launch in approximately a year, you also want to leave time for some feedback. So estimated deadline would be maybe in May of 2023 to have a sufficient rough draft of your new terms and conditions, which would leave yourself a month to do focus groups and customer research about how they feel about this new terms and conditions. You want to integrate as much feedback as you can in this. So we would expect a full-scale launch in June of 2023. As soon as that's finished, in the next month, you begin the marketing campaign. With a month to design a marketing campaign is normally enough time, and you want to get that out as soon as possible to advertise this new framework. Lastly, we suggest you begin supporting these efforts in October of 2023. And that way, this will be soon enough that no other companies will be involved in this legislation and Instagram will be at the forefront. So now that you know our implementation strategy, let me transfer it over to Josh to conclude our presentation.
So in closing, social media users often don't understand the terms and conditions they agree to when signing up for any social media platform. Instagram specifically, their terms and conditions needs to be more transparent. Our framework is ethical, is financially advisable, and it anticipates the legal changes that's coming forward in the future. With this recommendation, it is very detailed and time-conscious path towards an ethical term and condition policy. Thank you. This concludes our presentation as we presented our solution on an ongoing problem within the digital privacy. We are open to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. You had 3.5 minutes remaining. If I may then open the discussion to the other members of the Instagram. I take it we are members of the Instagram senior leadership. Is that correct?
You are the board of directors.
Board of directors. Okay. And let me ask the first member of the board of directors, Mr. Goldman, to speak first.
Thank you. I mean, it's an interesting presentation. I wonder if you could share with us, was there a specific Instagram problem that led us to ask you to address this question? I mean, you yourself said we have over 2 billion users and are growing. And why would we do this? In addition to which added, you talked about, you talked about this may make users more willing to join us, but we make our money off of advertisers. If we chase the advertisers away, how much do we gain?
Thanks for asking that question. So a lot of our reasoning for choosing Instagram is not necessarily because of Instagram in particular. It was because Instagram is a leader in the world of social media, and we feel like it takes for a big company like Instagram to set the precedent for digital transparency. As digital transparency isn't an issue solely binded to a singular company, it's more of an issue that spans industry broad. Data collection and data privacy is so very, very new, as we mentioned earlier. And we feel like by having a company like Instagram, such a big name with so many users, set the precedent for an ethical boundaries for data collection and data privacy, other companies will follow suit. And as you mentioned earlier, that there is a potential for loss of ad revenue. As mentioned with Cambridge Analytica was such a bad scenario for Facebook. The PR was so unbelievably terrible. Facebook stock dropped upwards of 50, 60% within the span of a couple of days. And moving forward from there, we feel like by Instagram taking this kind of initiative, and not just Instagram, other social media companies, by taking this kind of initiative and being transparent with consumers, we feel like a happy consumer will in turn lead to more revenue, better PR, a better brand image. And in turn, we feel like the trade-off is well worth it.
Thank you. And the other question, you chose a 10th grade level. I would venture to guess that a large percentage of the people using Instagram don't read the New York Times. And I wonder why you chose the 10th grade level and not something less. It's my understanding, or may not be true now, but it was at one point the military wrote its training manuals at the 6th grade level, because that's what was required. I'm wondering if there's something special as to why you chose the 10th grade level.
Yeah, so we chose the 10th grade level because it's almost the most easily recognizable as a standard reading level throughout all news outlets, not just the New York Times. Most are at the 10th grade reading level. So it was sort of our assumption that the large majority of adults in America would be able to read this and consent at that level. Most of the people using social media in general are at least at the 10th grade level, or at least the minimum age to join social media platforms is around that level. So it is an assumption there, and we could reduce it to the 6th grade level, but having that extra grades means that companies can't, they have the freedom to use a little bit more complicated words, because the way that they phrase their terms and conditions currently are already so complicated. It's almost it's a very difficult subject to write at anything less than a 10th grade reading level, just because there's so many different data collection terms. And so that level gives a little bit of leeway where it's low enough to be understandable by the majority of people, but it's still high enough that they're allowed the freedom to include some of those big data collection words.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Goldman. Judge Oliver?
Our company is governed by a few simple values. I'm asking you if what we do now is in violation of our company values. Do we need to update or change those values? What are you thinking in that regard?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So currently, Instagram has not faced a lawsuit of the nature that some of the other examples have, such as Facebook or Twitter. But I think what we learned from these case examples that are coming up is more and more companies are facing these lawsuits. So we want to make sure that Instagram is prepared and they're taking more of a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach because of the financial effects, the huge financial strain of these lawsuits on their company, as well as the brand image. Currently, the terms and conditions policy of Instagram, PJ mentioned earlier, is pretty generic. And so there are cases in which data is being collected that the consumer is not aware of. However, it hasn't reached to a point of a lawsuit. So we just want to make sure that Instagram is prepared and can avoid some of those financial and brand image issues that we see other companies are facing. And then as a result, their company is declining in their success.
Well, let me clarify a little bit. Instagram has three values: community first, inspire creativity, and simplicity matters. Do you have any comments on what we're doing with respect to those three values?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last part of your question?
The three values are community first, inspire creativity, and simplicity matters.
So I definitely think with the adoption of this framework, Instagram will be leading a message of transparency, which they haven't done as much in previous years. And in that, they will be able to reinforce their values of community and creativity because they're being honest with their consumers that this is the kind of data that we're actually taking. This is like, let us know how much data you want us to take, and building that sort of trust with their consumers will further reinforce the values that Instagram so deeply feels for.
Okay, I think that the last one, simplicity matters, is really what you're talking about. It supports your idea here. Instagram in the past has defined this as easy upload, easy editing, easy sharing of images. Maybe there's some additional aspect that we could tag on to that. I don't know the wording of it that would achieve your particular recommendation.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the main attractions of Instagram is that it's so simplistic to use and it's very user friendly. And that's kind of the same message we want to instill in their terms and conditions policy. If you want to go back to the slide on implementation. Go a little further, sorry. One more. Yeah, right here. So this is essentially the framework for the ethical terms and conditions policy. And as you can see, reading through this is what essentially distinguishes our terms and conditions policy with other competing companies. We are being simple and we're being forthright with what we're doing. We're making sure that it's at a 10th grade reading level. So you don't have to be a legal expert in order to read our thing. We're making sure that you have an option, you have a choice to choose the level of your privacy, and also the summary of the data that's being collected. And I think those points really enforce the idea of simplicity that is being used for the day-to-day functions that Instagram allows for. And we're just putting that in the back end and allowing that same sort of simplicity in their terms and conditions policy.
One last question. Is there any research that asks users, finds out from users if they really care? If 97% don't even read what we put out, maybe they don't really care. Maybe it isn't a problem for them. Maybe what we're doing is really okay.
Yeah, so that goes back into, there are definitely research out there that shows that people don't really care about the data that's being collected until it gets to a point where it's affecting them in their personal lives. As we mentioned earlier, 97% don't even read, young people don't even read the terms and conditions policy going forward. However, when you look at the Cambridge Analytica case, people weren't aware that their data was being taken by Cambridge Analytica, so they didn't really have the ability to act upon that. But after that whole scandal came out, you could see people start to distance themselves from Facebook. And that shows that they do care where their data is being stored. They just aren't aware of the fact that it's being taken or not. And so by being forthright, we're taking a proactive approach to this situation and avoiding the aftermath that Facebook had to deal with. After Facebook's scandal, they had to go through a huge brand change and be more forthright with their consumers and letting them know that, hey, we're changing our privacy terms and we're making sure we're listening to our consumers and we're not hiding anything. We're not misleading, we're not deceiving you. And I think in implementing our framework, we will be avoiding that aftermath and trying to rebuild ourselves by taking a more proactive approach.
And then one thing I wanted to add on to that is that one of the biggest reasons that such a large majority of young people don't read terms and conditions at all is not only because it's just assumed that they're going to be too complex, because they usually are, but there's a huge mental block to reading terms and conditions. People don't even want to click the link to even open the terms and conditions or skim it at all. They're much more comfortable with hitting a button back and forth. So if there was something in place where people could see that, oh, this is actually a very simple summary, a lot more people would be likely just to take a look at it, just to skim it in general. Maybe even not read the entire thing, but if it was easy and available for you just to see the basic key points, then a lot more people would.
But thank you, I'm done.
Mr. Mosinskis.
Again, thank you to our presenters for sharing so much information. One of the, I have two questions. One was around the sort of the goals or key performance indicators. How would we know if this was actually successful? So I know, and some of my colleagues on the board have asked sort of similar questions. Carl mentioned the, whether people really care. I'm curious, how would you define what success looks like? Maybe if you could explain a little bit more in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the ways that this framework allows to see how effective it is because we're allowing users the choice. And so because of that, after people read the terms and conditions, if they were actually reading through it and making informed decisions, their choices would be all over the place. So we can see if this is effective or not based on taking that data of the variation in people's choices. And if it was effective, there would be a lot of variation in different individuals' choices about, what level of privacy that they're comfortable with. But obviously, we'll leave it open for the option of people still just to hit accept to the terms and conditions. We're making the point that it is binary the way it is now. It's just yes or no, do you accept or not? But we're offering the choice of saying no, but you can have this level of privacy. And so we'd be able to see, does the percentage of people who just hit yes and use the software anyway, does that decrease? And does it get replaced with more people making those choices and lowering their privacy levels? And so we'll be able to see a proportion of people who just say yes or people who actually make these choices.
So that is helpful, PJ. I'm curious also if you or someone else from the team could speak to some of the cost of the actual initiative versus the potential lost cost related to advertising revenue that I think one of my colleagues had mentioned. So, by changing our privacy requirements, it does mean that potentially we could be losing some access for advertisers to accurately target people. So what can you share about how you expect that to play out? What kind of percentage or other information you might be able to share of what we might lose in terms of revenue versus what we might gain?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. So as we mentioned earlier, social media companies actively use an ad-based business model. So given that a majority of social media companies utilize targeted advertising, oftentimes through psychographic profiles, which is essentially a profile of a user based on a conglomerate of data. Like for example, if I like these 5 posts on Instagram, that data is collected, we can run it through an algorithm and we can predict, okay, Nabil liked these 5 posts about soccer, he's more likely to buy something maybe soccer related next time. That information is extremely, extremely valuable and companies are willing to pay a lot of money for it. So essentially what I'm trying to say is, if we give users more autonomy and more control over their data, and consumers are more sensitive to that, and they choose to regulate their data to be more private to them, then theoretically, Instagram would have access to less data. And in turn, that could lead to less opportunities or less openings for targeted advertising, which is extremely, extremely unpredictable because you would have to be able to predict consumer behavior, how they behave based on their privacy regulations, and how that would in turn affect the ad revenue based model. Based on our experience, we are unable to give a finite or a definitive answer on how that would affect performance, which is why we'd want to run a test run of this. But as we mentioned earlier, we feel like the trade-off is well worth it. As mentioned, the Cambridge Analytica and how poorly company performance fell and how the brand was absolutely destroyed after their such a tiny scandal. We feel like by practicing good ethics now, we can prevent a disaster in the future.
Yeah, just to add on to like the financial costs, if we're thinking about the financial cost that Instagram can avoid, that is tremendous, right? We saw what happened with Twitter, we saw what happened with Facebook. So we would be saving in the long run if we did implement such a strategy now and avoided such a lawsuit later. And in terms of implementing our specific framework, it wouldn't cost too much as it does now to implement our terms and conditions. All of our requirements are very simple. Legal experts and legal in-house counsel of Instagram could easily abide by these. In terms of the software development, Instagram is very equipped with expert software engineers, so it wouldn't take too much costs in terms of implementing this. And if we look at the cost versus the if we look at the benefit versus the cost of implementing this, we can see that the benefit far outweighs any of the costs that we're putting forth towards you guys.
Great, thank you.
And I'll be the last member of the board to speak here, and I appreciate my colleagues' questions, many of which I had as well. I'm bothered by this proposal, mostly because if you could leave that slide up, yeah, that particular slide. Here's why I'm bothered, and maybe several of you can respond to this. What this looks like to me is a well thought out, well organized outline for a piece of legislation, but not for a policy of a company trying to go it alone in a competitive industry. Now, let me explain. You spoke a lot about standardization and the importance of standardizing the requirements for transparency in this industry, and I couldn't agree more with you. I'd like to see more transparency myself, but why should my company, Instagram, stick its neck out to be cut off, its head cut off competitively in the marketplace, whatever the risk, when other companies are not going to be compelled to do the same thing? We're creating a situation where we're taking the risk and they're not. And you can say, well, we're leaders in the ethical domain, or we're we're out in front. Well, yeah, we're out in front, all right, but we might be punished for it severely. So why not see this as something we would lobby for in an industry association or in a Congress, but not something that we would adopt unilaterally? That's really my only question.
Okay, I'll be the first one to take this. First of all, really good question. And so we've thought about that a little bit in the sense of terms and conditions, or this transparency in terms of the service and use agreement is not something that companies are currently competing over. So making Instagrams simpler and trying to set the standard for that would introduce competition in the industry for having an ethical terms and conditions. And so this competition could end up being a healthy competition in between companies to assert that their use or end user license agreement is more easily understandable than the others, or it's more, forgiving and allowing you more autonomy in that. And so Instagram, being the first to set this standard, would be able to capitalize on all of this competition by being able to say, we are the only ones in the industry right now who are doing this. And so there's no other competitors. And slowly companies would start to recognize that as a good, sustainable competitive advantage. And so slowly, as companies would make their terms and conditions easier to understand, it would introduce competition. But my point is that this might be a friendly competition, or it could be beneficial to the industry as a whole, because it's really helping consumers completely.
Just to quickly add, before Nabil comes in. Also, I think what we can also look at is that one of the things that would distinguish Instagram when they do enter this healthy competition is that their message, their branding is going to become, we're transparent with consumers, we trust our consumers, and we want to have that kind of relationship. And I think that really puts you ahead of the competition. As we're seeing people become more socially aware of their privacy rights, being socially aware of what they're doing on the internet. And that's only going to become more and more prevalent as we progress in society. So I think by Instagram would be taking the first step, and they would instantly become the leaders, the ethical leaders, by saying that, hey, we trust our consumers and we want to be as transparent as we can as possible. And that really gives them a competitive advantage over their competitors. But go.
Yeah, thank you, Rashni. Kind of just to echo what everyone's been saying, but we really do believe that transparency in data usage will become a competitive advantage in the very, very near future. We feel like instead of something that deters a company, we feel like that's a feature. Instead of being something that another user has to read over and over again, we feel like this will be something that users will actively seek out. So not only is this a trade-off, but we feel like this is a feature to add on to Instagram. But not only that, to advance the conversation forward, we feel like the legal environment is just simply out of date right now. And we really do believe that technology has outpaced Congress. And we do feel like in the future that once legislation catches up to this current world of data and big data, we feel like laws and regulations, as we mentioned in the laws in the prior slides, will be in a situation where frameworks like this will not only be necessary for a competitive advantage, but we feel like frameworks like this will be legally required. So by setting that precedent of being an industry leader and being ahead of Congress in this sense, we feel like Instagram has far more to gain than there is to lose, and they can be in the front of the line when this comes around. And we feel like that time will come around very soon.
Thank you very much, Team Champaign Urbana.
And also just to add on, if you go to the appendix slide, there's a map.
There's a what?
Yeah, so this basically shows what's currently being done in terms of privacy legislation. And so we see only 4 states that are red, which means that their laws are in place and they're signed. And we see the majority of the states don't really have anything protecting consumer privacy. And we see that some of them are in committee, but those that are in committee have been in committee for a while. So we can't rely on states to catch up before we end up getting the effects of a lawsuit. So I think, again, just to reiterate that proactive approach. And then Josh, go.
And at the end of the day, we urge Instagram to consider the question that I said earlier. What would a virtuous company do? Yes, Instagram may be forfeiting some money that they're gaining off people signing data away that they didn't know. But ethically, if they was to make a change and to implement our recommendation, in a sense, it'll be worth the shortcomings that they will get from like future lawsuits and things that my team has explained. So I would just urge Instagram to stick by their moral, their values, which one I heard was community. And if you actually care about the community, you care about your users, and you care about manipulating your users or getting information from them honestly. So thank you.
Okay, if I could ask our technical consultant to shift us back out of share screen, and thank you very much. Now we step out of our roles, the judges do, and we're now just looking over your shoulders and giving you our opinion about the presentation itself and ways of improving it. And with this in mind, that you're going to be competing tomorrow in a 10-minute presentation and in a 90-second presentation. How excruciating is that? And so if we have any tips to offer you, we will on those issues too. But let's go through the roll call of our distinguished judges and see what comments they might have outside of their Instagram board of directors role. Mr. Goldman.
Thank you. First of all, a great presentation and a very complex issue, one that is going to increasingly be discussed around the world and in Congress. I would make the following observations, I think, that might be helpful and make your presentation stronger. It was a good presentation, but Mr. Oliver, I think, alluded to it. I think if you concentrate on Instagram's own value structure, especially simplicity matters, and point out to its board of directors that you're violating your own standards. Simplicity, yes, and uploading, simplicity and transferring and everything, but simplicity and also how you interact with our company. And the change is in order to make them live their values, and that becomes a sellable point, like you pointed out. And the reason they need to do it is what you pointed out. Legislation's on the horizon. People are getting angry. Yeah, they don't read it as long as it doesn't bother them. And the moment something goes wrong, they're out for blood. So I think all of what you said is true. The other thing I would just offer is you don't feel anything. Never say you feel in the presentation. You're the consultants. It's your opinion. It's our view of what's happening today. It's our prediction or whatever. So you've got to be positive about what you're saying. Feeling is so, well, we sort of feel this way. How do you feel? How do we feel? No, board, this is our prediction of what's going to happen to you, and this is why we're here to save you. So those would be my recommendations. But all in all, a good job and a good understanding of the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. And Mr. Oliver?
I like the presentation also. Yeah, there we go. I like the presentation also, especially you knew what to do with your hands, which was basically keep them out of the picture. I think the one change that I would recommend for your future presentations is to change your ethical section. Drop the discussion of deontology and virtue ethics. I think that is unhelpful and wasn't very useful, and replace it with the values of the company and build your argument around fulfilling simplicity. And also that also helps with the community first. You'd have to read some more on what they mean by community first, but it helps build community, I think. So I think in two values there. it would be very helpful. So that would be the one thing that I would recommend doing. The presentation skills, I thought worked out very well for online presentation. I liked the charts. I thought they were good charts. Nicely done.
Mr. Mosinskas?
Thanks, Ken. And again, thank you to the team. Good presentation. Again, I think as my colleagues mentioned, it's a complex topic. You're tackling an issue that I think it's one of those issues that if it was easy to solve, someone would have already solved it already. The fact that people don't read terms and conditions, making something like that easier. I mean, it got me thinking about social engineering, and to some degree, I think some of the feedback in the conversation afterwards was sort of leading in that direction. But how you're, and I think this goes into one of my main pieces of feedback, making sure that when you're setting the stage for the presentation, trying to from the outset convey as much of a win-win as possible. And again, that you're coming in as consultants to present, to share some information about something that you feel will make not only avoid risk, which I know is a large part of what I think a lot of what you are presenting was, but I think in some ways focusing some of the conversation more, as my colleague suggested, around the values, around, again, those positive aspects. The risk analysis is, of course, is important, and that always is a factor, but perhaps not leading with that as much. I mean, it's important, but I think focusing on the wins in that regard. I agree also with my colleagues about the changes to the ethical section, and I guess along sort of the win-win aspect, one of the questions I was asking was about the financials. I think thinking forward, being able to, as much as possible, articulate positive financial, some kind of positive financial value to this. That was maybe a little bit more, provided a little bit more detail in terms of even just the costs. This is going to take a certain amount of time. What are the costs? What things well, again, it's maybe a little outside the scope, but thinking about that aspect. But I like the graphics. The overall pace was good. I think the handoffs were good, the sharing across the team. So nice job overall.
Thank you. And my own comments echo many of those of my colleagues. I thought the slides were very well done. You avoided the pitfalls of putting too much information on a single slide. And it looked to me like you were doing that deliberately with the design of the slides. And I think that was a real asset to communication. Let's see. Regarding that one slide that was up during our role play that had all of the elements of your, the abstract specific TLDR choices, length, level. That's the essence of what you're proposing for Instagram, and it's very elegant. It's clear, and to someone looking on from the outside, it's like, wow, why hasn't that been around for a long time? And yet it hasn't. So I think that is really the brilliant centerpiece for your presentation. And I think that it also is a recipe for future legislation. I was in the role play, I was kind of being grumpy about it toward Instagram and competition. But, I did a case study once of a company called Piper Jaffray, which is in the financial services industry. And it got its knuckles rapped once and had to pay a $30 million fine for conflict of interest. And the SEC was all over it, and it reformed itself in some very creative ways. And the SEC was so impressed with the reforms that it did that it asked them to come in and help it regulate, with using its reforms as a model, the rest of the industry. So it's not unknown for a company to make changes in its own policies internally, and for government to see that happen and to take a company's self-regulation as a model for regulating an entire industry. And so I think that one could have one's cake and eat it too here, and avoid the competitive dilemma that I was posing. So I'd love to see that slide being used in Congress. Anyway, other than that, I thought it was just a really interesting presentation. I mean, you cut through so much stuff, and you know, none of us sitting here have probably read those agreements that we've been asked to agree to, and we all know that they're unreadable, and we don't always know, most of us, what we're agreeing to, and it's always bothered me, and it's always bothered most people, I'm sure. And you've got a solution, you really do. And so I found that quite impressive. Nice job. Oh, one other thing on the ethics thing. The suggestion that you avoid deontology and virtue ethics, I'm not as offended by that as my colleagues might be, or negative toward it as my colleagues might be. But I like the idea of using the company values as your departure point there. And I think you can get the points in that you did get in with deontology and virtue ethics off of the company values. So you don't have to use the lingo of deontology and virtue ethics to get at not using people as tools and treating them with honesty and the list of virtues that you were interested in. So I think, and I think maybe my colleagues meant the same thing, you can get at the ethical essence without using the ethical terminology. Those terms are useful in a certain framework setting, but it's always nice to be able to tell a company, live up to your own values. It's an easier sell than to bring values in that might seem a little foreign to them. Okay, end of sermon. Nice job. Do you have any questions for us?
I thought about, because we did want to include how much it would cost to implement this framework, but we really had no idea how to make an estimate for that. Do you guys have any advice on how we could go about getting that information?
Gentlemen, any thoughts about?
Well, I'm happy to chime in. I think considering your role in the presentation and speaking to the audience, considering that your role is as a consultant that's being brought in to be able to make a set of recommendations. Again, as consultants are brought into these kinds of contexts, it just depends on what the outcome that the board is looking for. It definitely helps a board to have some context of the distinct financial impact that something might have in order to have a conversation or to sort of give guidance as to whether they're leaning in one direction or not. I would say some of it is just trying to put some numbers out there. I mean, generally speaking, if you had to estimate, you had a timeline, which was good. So I mean, you could have used that timeline to, let's say, come up with a cost estimate, for example, if you had to have a small team of developers. Well, how much does a small team of developers cost to hire for a 3-month period of time? Or how much does a marketing person or a designer cost to do this kind of work? Again, it's if you're the consultants that would be coming in to do this work also that's being proposed, then some of the assumption would be, well, yeah, you would already be able to tell us some of that information. So I think there are some general information you can find about what the, consulting costs or hourly costs for those kinds of roles might be, and then just come up with an estimate, and just put it, just having a number out there associated with it can be helpful.
Mr. Oliver or Mr. Goldman, do you have any thoughts?
Well, just I would, one of the things you do know is the cost to Facebook with the Cambridge Analytica stuff. And so people as well as companies are more upset by what they lose than what they might gain. And so you can do estimates of the cost of consultants or programmers, but match that against, all it takes is 1 or 2 very upset people over the loss of their data, and they become a class action lawsuit, and that's a lot of money gone instantly. And if you then offset, well, the cost versus that, if you can avoid that loss, you don't make a gain, but you avoid a loss, then, because there is very hard to measure what it's going to cost, what ad revenues will be lost, what's going to cost to program, what it's going to look like. But you can begin to make estimates within the background for the board, reminding them of there's a major loss if you don't do something. And it's very clear that, Professor Goodpasture's point, if you're going to face regulation, why not be the people who wrote it?
Yeah.
And this industry is going to be regulated. That may not be this year, it may not be next year, but it will be regulated. And if they become the example and are already living under the regulation, their lives are much easier.
One thing that I did want to add, sort of along these lines, which I thought the team did well, at a few points, you provided sort of a concept of an on-ramp, and which, whether you're talking about sort of the funding that would be required to do something like this, the time investment, that you're creating an opportunity, again, whether it was through, I think Roshni, I can't remember if it was Roshni or PJ mentioned, being able to choose different levels and using some of that data, doing a pilot or proof of concept as a way to reduce sort of essentially the commitment to go down a path as a set of options that, okay, well, you could go all in on this, or you could progressively dip your toe in further and further and see some benefit come out of that, and measure the benefit as you go through. I think that's always a powerful narrative to tell in a business proposal context.
The direct cost might be calculated using labor hours multiplied by burden rate. Burden rate means not only what people are paid, but what the benefits are and the overhead costs are for them. Those are going to be difficult for you to do without knowing what the company's rates are. But it doesn't matter that much, because it's going to be a relatively small amount compared to the loss rates in terms of legal fees and fines and that sort of thing that potentially could arise. It's hard to talk about what those might be, because the company may be lucky and not ever have to face those kinds of fees. On the other hand, there is some history of what kind of awards and costs other companies have faced. So the whole discussion of costs is going to be, I think, vague. And I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on it, except to say that the labor costs to implement this are going to be relatively small compared to the potential losses in legal costs.
And I would just add in that regard, you know, and speaking to a board or anyone, to remind them, they buy insurance. They figure on some potential cost. They have a cost for things that may never happen, and they're perfectly comfortable with it. So this is just another example of going in that direction.
Yeah, I think I'll chime in a little bit. I think the point about the cost of getting sued and facing what Facebook had to face is the way to go if you're going to try to calculate costs. You can't estimate how many advertisers you're going to lose. You're going to lose some. You might lose quite a few because they're not going to get the kind of data they want if your users decide they want more privacy. But you can't know in advance how many of those advertisers are going to demur or leave. But you can put a probability on the likelihood of a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit. And the probability is going to get greater and greater as time goes on. And as class action lawyers smell more money, pardon me for being crude, but after a couple of successes, you know that you're going to become a target. And not only is it a matter of some one of your users complaining, it's also a matter of some one of your users being discovered by a potential class action lawyer and being encouraged to complain. And so there are forces at work in the environment, in other words, that are aiming, that are going to bring a lawsuit to your company, whether you like it or not. And I think the probabilities are going up. So I think you can persuade the board pretty fast that we're next. Does that help?
Most definitely up. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? I think it's time to adjourn, and but this has been a delight from my point of view, and thank you. I hope you do real well tomorrow in the excruciating 10-minute and 90-second competitions, which are exciting, but a challenge. Thank you very much.
And I'm supposed to remind the participants tomorrow to email Dr. White if you haven't, about who's going to be presenting tomorrow. So that's just a reminder.
10-minute, yeah, for the 10-minute and
Yep.
the 90-second. Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck. Well done.
Nice job, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Judges, stay on. Great job, gentlemen. That was really fun.
You want to stop the recording?